speaker on the Bhagavad Gita is Tamohara Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Some of you may not know a little background on Tamohara. I met Tamohara many, many years ago, just after he had done a stint as the headmaster at one of the Gurukulas. Then he moved back to Illinois, and similar to myself, he worked in a hardware store, and then he got his position as a professor at the university, and retired from that quite honorably, stepped back into the main light in ISKCON, and took a significant role with the GBC, offering many, many years of service on a variety of fields, including helping to lead this community, until the time he retired as a GBC emeritus, honorably passed on his duties to those younger. And so we're very happy to have him come up here and enlighten us tonight from the Bhagavad Gita. Tamohara Prabhu, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Well, there was a wonderful introduction by Chaturama. I don't usually get those. I think everyone applauded because when they heard that I had retired. Everybody missed that one. Okay. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Balaba Giravaradhari. Gopi Jana Balaba Giravaradhari. Yashoda Nandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yashoda Nandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parvrajagachara Soter Sadashri Shim's Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakti Vrinda Ki Jai. Gaur Premananda. All glories to assembled devotees. All glories to assembled devotees. All glories to assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Sankadale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namani Namaste Sarasvadevam Gauravani Vacharni Nirvisheshishin Varipaskatari Sitani. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we are going to speak, at least the title of my class is called Achieving Devotional Happiness. And we're going to read from Bhagavad Gita 14:20. Let's go through it once responsively. Gunane tanatitya trin Dehi deha samudbhavan Janma mrityu jara dhakar Vimuktom ritam ashnute. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. When the embodied being is able to transcend these three modes associated with material body, he can become free of birth, death, old age, and their distresses, and can enjoy nectar, even in this life. Report. How one can stay in the transcendental position, even in this body, in full Krishna consciousness, is explained in this verse. The Sanskrit word dehi means embodied. Although one is within this material body, by his advancement in spiritual knowledge, he can be free from the influence of the modes of nature. He can enjoy happiness of spiritual life, even in this body, because after leaving this body, he is certainly going to the spiritual sky. But even in this body, he can enjoy spiritual happiness. In other words, devotional service in Krishna consciousness is the sign of liberation from material entanglement, and this will be explained in the 18th chapter. When one is free from the influence of the three modes of material nature, he enters into devotional service. Om Jnana Tarandasya Gnanjana Salakaya Chaksaramnitamena Tasma Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakopatrubhischa Kripasindu Bhevacha Patitano Pavanebhyo Vaishabhebhyo Namo Namaha. So today's topic is happiness. And it's explained in our scriptures and by Srila Prabhupada that there are really three kinds of happiness, three large categories of happiness, and of course many subcategories within that. But they can broadly be defined, and Prabhupada explains this in the 3rd chapter of Nectar Devotion, as material happiness, spiritual happiness, and devotional happiness. Now sometimes we sort of use spiritual and devotional interchangeably, but here Prabhupada makes a distinction between them. And he explains, based upon, this is in the 1st chapter of Nectar Devotion, of course, Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. He says, Srila Rupa Goswami has analyzed the different sources of happiness. He's divided happiness into three categories, which are happiness derived from material enjoyment, happiness derived by identifying oneself with the Supreme Brahman, in other words, thinking oneself one with God, impersonal realization, and 3, happiness derived from Krishna consciousness, which he probably calls devotional happiness. So, what are the differences? Well, there's 2 analogies, both involving water, I think that are interesting, that are used in our scriptures to explain the differences or the relative degrees of happiness between these different concepts. The happiness of material enjoyment is explained in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 20, verse 10. Now this is the chapter on description of Vrindavan in the autumn season, in the rainy season. And you may remember in that chapter there's so many analogies. Different analogies are given all through that chapter, comparing different things in material nature to spiritual concepts. And that's the way that we see that many of our acharyas, and Srila Prabhupada, of course, does this extensively, is uses an analogy which compares one thing to another so that you can better understand. Even though it's not an exact match, it gives you at least the concept. So in this verse, it says, with the advent of the rainy season, the insignificant streams which had become dry began to swell and then strayed from their proper courses, like the body, property, and money of a man controlled by the urges of his senses. Now, it's the purport I'm mainly focusing here on. Prabhupada says Srila Prabhupada comments. Now, we all know he didn't actually translate and write commentaries past chapter 14, or well, actually through chapter 13 of the Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th canto. But I think he did write, didn't he write commentaries, was it Light of the Bhagavad? Where he commented on the verses? Yes. Is that right, Mother Narayani? Yeah, okay. Srila Prabhupada comments, during the rainy season, many small ponds, lakes, and rivulets become filled with water. Otherwise, the rest of the year, they remain dry. Similarly, materialistic persons are dry, but sometimes when they're in so-called opulent position, with a home or children or a little bank balance, they appear to be flourishing. But immediately afterwards, they become dry again, like the small rivulets and ponds. The poet Vijayapati said that in the society of friends, family, children, wife, and so on, there's certainly some pleasure, but that pleasure is compared to a drop of water in the desert. Everyone is hankering after happiness, just as in the desert, everyone is hankering after water. If in the desert there's a drop of water, the water is there, of course, but the benefit from that drop of water is very insignificant. So you can just imagine, you're very, very thirsty, you're out in the desert, it says, oh, I have some water, oh, wonderful, that's what I need, water, so you get a little tiny drop. So yes, it's water, and you certainly have a taste for that, and you want more of it, but does it give any satisfaction? Not really. So Prabhupada says, in our materialistic way of life, we're hankering after the ocean of happiness, of friends, society, mundane love, and we're getting no more than a drop of water. So, material life compared to the drop of water in the desert. Now, the second one was the happiness of impersonal realization. Prabhupada says here in chapter 3 of Nectar Devotion, the scriptures have clearly indicated that the ecstasy of devotional service to the Supreme Lord is far superior to the bliss of impersonal liberation, Brahmananda. Indeed, the happiness emerging into the Lord's existence, the Yuji Mukti, is like a puddle of water in a calf's hoofprint, compared with the ocean of bliss derived from devotional service. So, Brahmananda, the bliss of impersonal realization, fares a little bit better than material. Instead of just being a drop, we get a whole amount of water in a calf's hoofprint. And the comparison is, of course, to the ocean. It's almost like no comparison. The ocean of the nectar of devotional service, of that bliss. So, devotional happiness. How do we experience that? Well, our most essential nature, the nature of the Atma, of the Jiva, is to be happy. So it's not something artificial. We don't so much learn how to be happy, but it's more that we revive that natural happiness that's within us as the pure spirit soul acting in relationship to Krishna. So, if that happiness has to do with the soul in relationship with Krishna, first we need to understand the nature of Krishna. Now, of course, that's a huge subject, and we could spend, well, lifetimes talking about the nature of Krishna. But very simply, we're just going to say that Krishna, of course, is the Supreme Lord, Swayam Bhagavan, the original form of the Lord. And so he is that one original person, but he manifests different energies. So it's through those different material energies and spiritual energies that he has variety and different forms, and so much appears from those energies. We get all this variegatedness, all of these pastimes, all these different incarnations, and all the different, all the other expansions of Krishna's energy. And those expansions are listed as three primary. Again, there's unlimited, we could go into unlimited detail of the variety of Krishna's energies and his expansions, and he has even just so many different kind of incarnations, and but the Bhagavad Gita lists this very simply for us so that we can understand easily that there are three basic energies, and these are described in the 7th chapter, verses 4, 5, and 6, or 4, 5, and 6. Okay. So first is earth, water, air, ether, mind, intelligence, false ego. Altogether, these 8 constitute my separated material energies. So this is the material energy. First it's described, and there's, and this is divided into 8 parts. The 5 elements of the gross body, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, and the 3 elements of the subtle body, mind, intelligence, and false ego. And it's interesting, this word says, these are my separated, bina is the Sanskrit word, probably translated as separated material energies. So in other words, yes, they're coming from Krishna, but there's a little separation, right? In other words, well, we'll get to that. But in other words, Krishna doesn't identify so much with material energy. Yes, he creates it. Yes, it expands from. Yes, he's in control of it. But he works more indirectly. And it's more his other agents, demigods, Maya Devi, do most of the actually functioning, and sort of like organizing, keeping the material energy going and working and interacting and all of that. So he sort of lets that one go. It says, besides these, O mighty armed Arjuna, there's another superior energy of mine which comprises the living entities who are exploiting the resources of this material inferior nature. So, now we're talking about the jiva, the billions, the countless numbers of individual atomic spirit souls, which is each one of us, who constitute this superior energy. Now, superior energy is certainly different than material energy. This is Krishna's energy. This is spiritual energy. So what's important in this verse is it is establishing that the jiva is spiritual in nature, the same quality of Krishna. It says we're exploiting the resources of the material, of the prakriti, the material inferior nature. So there's the interaction. Well, Krishna's a little bit aloof from material energy. The jiva is we're right in there. We are interacting with that material energy. In fact, that material energy has overwhelmed us sometimes, right? Pretty much has really taken over our consciousness, our mind, our intelligence, what to speak of the senses. So very strong interaction between the jiva and the prakriti. Then, the next third verse of the series, all created beings have their sources in these 2 natures. Of all that is material and all that is spiritual in the world, know for certain that I am both the origin and the dissolution. So, they are both coming from Krishna. They're both coming from God. They are both part of his energies expanding. So, again, we have the prakriti, the material energy, and then we have Krishna's spiritual energy, which really there's 2 parts to it. There's Krishna himself and all of his direct expansions, his shaktis, Vishnu tattva expansion, etc., and the jiva. Okay? Now, and they're of similar natures, but of course quite different quantities, quite different in their size, abilities, etc. So why does Krishna expand into all these energies? Sometimes Krishna is called Atmarama, he's called, right? In other words, self-satisfied, he's Swarat, he's independent. Why does he expand? Why does he need all this? Why does he need all these shaktis? Why does he need all the jivas, for that matter? He doesn't really exactly need them, but he wants to experience relationship and love. Some of our acharyas, and of course in our scriptures, we learn, and when we study a little more deeply of Krishna's nature, and of course we can never really understand Krishna's nature, but at least on a sort of an intellectual basis, we can try to get some of the main concepts, and then hopefully as we advance, we get more and more realization of those concepts to become more real to us, something we deeply understand within. But we do understand that Krishna's nature is to expand love and expand relationships. Krishna actually seeks rasa, relationship. And so, thus, all the jivas, all of us are expanded so that he can have loving relationships with us. Which, if you really think about it for a moment, that's pretty wonderful, isn't it? In other words, God's all-powerful. He could be anything, right? I mean, he could have any qualities he wanted. And the qualities that Krishna has is the desire to have loving relationships with us. That's just a fantastic, wonderful, beautiful thing. And that's part of the whole beauty of spiritual life, why there's such great happiness in devotional activity and devotional life as compared to material life. So, what is his nature? Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Leela has a 4th chapter, quite a bit of description about this. I'll just read one verse. Anadamsi Hladini, Shadamshi Sandini, Chidangshi Samvit Yare Jnana Karimani. Hladini is his aspect of bliss, Sandini of eternal existence, and Samvit of cognizance, which is also accepted as knowledge. So he has his existence, his eternal aspect, called Sandini, his knowledge aspect, Samvit, and he has the Hladini aspect of bliss, of happiness. It's there. We sometimes also talk about these in terms of Sat Chit Ananda. I think there's a technical, metaphysical, ontological difference between the two, but I haven't yet to discover it. They're pretty close. I mean, for all practical purposes, we could almost, interchange those to some degree. Anyway, here's an explanation, a little bit more from Srila Prabhupada in his purport. He says, in his thesis, Bhagavad Sandarbha 103, it's funny, Jiva Goswami's, his books, his verses are called Anuchudas or something. Yeah. Anyway, for those of you who are taking notes, I'm sure you are, and want to reference this, run home and look up the exact quote. It's not 103. I looked. I don't know. I couldn't find this. But anyway, it's somewhere, I trust, in Bhagavad Sandarbha. Srila Jiva Goswami explains the potencies of the Lord as follows. The transcendental potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead by which he maintains his existence is called Sandini. The transcendental potency by which he knows himself and causes others to know him is called Samvit. The transcendental potency by which he possesses transcendental bliss and causes his devotees to have bliss is called Hladini. So it's interesting the way that Jiva Goswami explains this in his Bhagavad Sandarbha is that it's not only that he possesses these qualities, but he gives those qualities to us, to his devotees, so that they also have those qualities. So Krishna both personally enjoys loving relationships with his devotees, and the devotees equally enjoy great happiness and bliss in relationship. So this is kind of part of the background understanding of why we are in this loving relationship with Krishna and why we can experience our greatest happiness and real happiness through that relationship of Krishna. So this is a deep subject matter, and I was thinking about really going into this, and I was, warned by one of my family members, now don't get too esoteric here. This is Sunday Feast, Bhagavad Gita. Let's stick with the basics. So anyway, that's all we're going to say about that. But I just thought those are some nice verses. Okay, so for reciprocation of love to occur, the devotee must be of the same quality, right? There has to be some qualitative sameness, or Krishna wouldn't be able to engage in this loving relationship, these blissful, ecstatic varieties of rasa with the living entities. So, this is from Krishna book, chapter 87, everyone's favorite, Prayers by the Personified Vedas. It is said in the Vedanta Sutra, Anandamayo Vyasat, the Supreme Brahman and the subordinate Brahman, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity, are both joyful by nature. So, Vedanta Sutra confirms the nature of the living entity. Here, of course, this is Vedanta Sutra, which is written a certain way, not so much in a devotional way, but much more of a philosophical, intellectualized way of understanding things. It's called the Supreme Brahman and subordinate Brahman. Brahman, in this case, it means spiritual energy. So, this, it's almost like uppercase and lowercase. Capital B Brahman is Krishna, small spiritual entity, or the living entities. But we're both joyful by nature. Now, this is described sometimes, as I said, we sometimes call it Satchidananda or Satchidananda Vigraha. Prabhupada always liked to use this word, add this word Vigraha. Vigraha just simply means form. So it's the form, the spiritual form of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. So we have an eternal form. Krishna has an eternal form. It's not like these are some, just concepts, theoretical concepts floating out there in the ether, And, it's like sometimes when people say, well, God is love. And what does that mean? It's just sort of love floating out there. No, love means relationship. And relationship means person. And person means form. Not material form, but spiritual form. And that's what Anandamayo Vyasat means. It means spiritual form possessed by both the living entity and by Krishna. So we are the jivas certainly possess a similar nature, but we have the same qualities as the Supreme. So what's different? We have the same quality. How are we different than Krishna? Quantity, right? We have very small amounts. Just like we talk about Atma and Paramatma. Atma, the soul, Paramatma, the Supreme Soul. Atma can know itself and know some things around us, where Paramatma knows everything. Paramatma is within every living entity. It knows the workings and the nature and the inner thoughts and everything of every single living entity in the universe. Isn't that hard to imagine? I mean, I can't. Sometimes I've tried to think about that, and I just give up. It's unfathomable, isn't it? How Krishna could be in everyone's heart and know what each one of us are doing. But then I was thinking, even logically, it's actually quite understandable, because we are coming from him. So he's going to know everything about his creation, everything about his expansions, everything about his energies. I was thinking, like, if you're a Grihastha and you're a parent and you have one or two children, you know those children really well. You know them inside out thoroughly. I mean, unless you don't pay any attention to them or abandon them or something. And what if you had 10 children? You wouldn't even know them. Well, of course, the mother's going to know each one of those 10 children, right? So anyway, expand that about 63 trillion times. Krishna's going to know every one of his living entities, every one of his jivas intimately. So we have the same qualities as Krishna, different quantity, and because we have that different quantity, because we are small, because we are finite and Krishna's infinite, we have, unfortunately, the tendency to become covered over. We become covered over by the gross and subtle material bodies. Unlike Krishna, who says he always remains apart, separate from this material energy, we become very entangled, and we become covered by the three modes of nature, three modes of material nature. So, Sanatana Goswami, when he first approached Lord Chaitanya, he had just, long story, he got away from his job with the Nawab Shah, whatever, the Muslim ruler. That's a whole wonderful pastime. And he gets to, where did he meet? This is a quiz. I'm saying it's a quiz because I forgot. Was it Prayag? Where did he meet Lord Chaitanya? Meet Lord Sanatana Goswami? Anybody remember? It wasn't Vrindavan or anything obvious like it. Anyway, wherever it was, he was staying. So Lord Sanatana Goswami comes. He's now like a mendicant. He's offering himself humbly before Lord Chaitanya, and so he takes the part of the ordinary conditioned soul. And we see this often with these great devotees. They take a very humble position, and they do so, why? So that we can learn from them. They take our position. So he says, what's the first question he says? He says, I am considered a learned man, but I do not even know the purpose of life. He says, so who am I? Why am I suffering? And then Lord Chaitanya begins his instructions. And his first instruction, very famous verse, Jivera Swarupoya, Krishnera Nichidas, Krishnera Tatashta Shakti, Beta Beta Prakash. It is the living entity's constitutional position, which means who we are at our very essence, our very nature, to be an eternal servant of Krishna, Jivera Swarupoya. Because he's the marginal energy of Krishna, Krishnera Tatashta Shakti, The jiva is called Tatashta Shakti, marginal, and a manifestation simultaneously one with and different from the Lord. Beta Prakash, like a molecular particle of sunshine or fire. Krishna has 3 varieties of energy. So, marginal energy, one and different, like a particle of sunshine or fire. You have this huge sun, you have a little tiny ray or particle of the sun as compared to us, or a huge fire, a little spark. It's like a jiva. So then Lord Chaitanya instructs about the Lord's different energies, just as we were talking about. He explains that concept. Then he says, forgetting Krishna, the living entity has been attracted by the external feature, prakriti, material energy, from time immemorial. Therefore, the illusory energy, Maya, gives him all kinds of misery in his material existence. Samsara dukkha. Dukkha means, of course, unhappiness. Samsara, the cycle of birth and death. So the jiva's marginal potency, Tatashta Shakti, has a tendency to misuse his independence. So we all have small amounts of independence. Because Krishna's independent, we have his qualities, we have a little independence. And when we misuse that, we become conditioned. And Prabhupada says in purport to that by proper use of our independence, we become engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord. So, Srila Prabhupada says in Beyond Illusion and Doubt, little book, the spirit soul is now within this material body, but originally the spirit soul had no material body. The spiritual body of the spirit soul is eternally existing. So it's not just that we give up this material body and then we become like sort of a, like the impersonalists think, or sometimes they think that you just become part of the energy, become part of the universe. No, you have a spiritual body, an eternal spiritual body. That, and Prabhupada's saying that's always eternally existing. The material body is a coding of the spiritual body. He said Brahmabhuta, or that satisfaction of spiritual life, is attained when we no longer identify with the material body, but with the spirit soul within. When we come to that platform, we become joyful. So again, going back to, this is our formula for happiness, to be able to get out of the illusion of these material coverings of the body, mind, gross and subtle bodies, and understand our real nature as Krishna's part and parcel, eternal servants, devoted in service to Krishna. So, each soul is unique, and we each have a unique relationship with God. Now you think with, several billion living entities, just all kind of be maybe a few basic categories or something, there's a few million or like this, and no. Each one of us is individual, right? We have our own thoughts, we have our own desires. Jiva Goswami explains this very thoroughly in the Paramatma Sandarbha, how the living entity has independence, the jiva by nature, the Atma, has volition, it has desire, it has bliss within it, all of these things, all the knowledge, all of these qualities are within each of us. And Krishna relates to every living entity. Srimad Bhagavatam, Lord Brahma's famous prayers in 14th chapter. In the 7th chapter, in the purport, it says, Srila Sanatana Goswami, this is in Srila Sanatana Goswami's purports or commentary on the Bhagavatam. Vaishnav Toshini, I forget the name of his commentary. Anyway, Srila Sanatana Goswami further explains that the Lord manifests a specific spiritual quality for the benefit of each living entity. Since there are innumerable living entities within the confines of the material creation, the Lord manifests infinite qualities, thus every conditioned soul can appreciate the Supreme Lord in a particular way. So Krishna, not only is he just there as super soul or in our heart, like a generic, sort of thing. No, he's there specifically in relationship with us. And of course, we know also in other verses from Bhagavad Gita, he says he responds accordingly, right? everybody, as we surrender to Krishna, he responds in that way. So it's almost like whatever relationship you want, Krishna will respond in that way. So everyone has a slightly unique, you're a slightly unique individual. I mean, not that we're all hugely different, but there's those little differences there. And those differences they appear in the form of rasa, in the form of relationship. And so whatever that relationship is that we have and want, Krishna responds to that. If any of you ever thought, now if I am ever fortunate enough to go back to Godhead, what if I'm in some rasa I don't really like? Or anyone ever thought that? Only me. No. Well, you won't. It can't happen. Because you are in your constitutional position, which means that's where you want to be and that's what you want to do. Right? It's kind of like Rupa and Sanatan, greatest Vaishnavas ever, right? Head of the 6 Goswamis, totally immersed in Radha Krishna Bhav, the love of the gopis and Radharani for Krishna. He had a brother, Anupam. And Anupam had, of course, a very great son named Jiva Goswami, who was also like disciples of Rupa and Sanatan, his uncles. But Anupam really tried. He really tried to get with the program. He tried to get in the mood, but he just couldn't do it. Why? Because he was a disciple of Rama. He was a great devotee of Ramachandra. Right? And finally Lord Chaitanya said to him, "It's fine, it's all right. You keep your relationship with Ramachandra. That's your rasa. That's who you are. Don't worry about it." In other words, he's perfectly situated. And whether somebody is in, Vaikuntha with Narayan or with Vishnu, or if they're, with Ramachandra, or they're with Nrsingadev, or whether they're with Krishna in Goloka Vrindavan, or in a material world in Gokula Vrindavan, every one of those pure devotees has Krishna prema. So they're all happy. They're all perfectly situated. They're happy. Now, of course, there's analysis of, different degrees and all of that, but at our stage, not so important. The thing is, you will be situated rightly in a place that for you will give you the greatest happiness. So the material body forms around the spiritual body to some degree, at least in the human form of life. Prabhupada said, this is in that same article, he says, when the spirit soul is liberated, this material covering perishes, but his spiritual body manifests itself in its individual capacity. It is stated that when a living entity gives up the material embodiment and enters into the spiritual world, he revives his spiritual body, and his spiritual body can see the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face. He can hear and speak to him face to face, and he can understand the Supreme Personality as he is. Okay. So how do we achieve a spiritual body and obtain this eternal happiness? This is going to be something you've never heard before. It's by the practice of sadhana bhakti as given to us by Srila Prabhupada and the Acharyas. This point, no. Yes, it's the basic instructions that we have heard from day one of Srila Prabhupada are perfect for neophytes, for beginners, and they are perfect for very advanced devotees. Because devotional service starts with Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smarnam, hearing, chanting, and remembering, right? So we hear in our Srimad Bhagavatam and other classes, or we read Srila Prabhupada's books, we're hearing, we're chanting, either our japa, we're chanting in kirtan, we try our best to remember Krishna. Prabhupada talks about that a lot, how we can remember Krishna in different ways. That's a whole other class. But when you think about it, so in the spiritual world, when they are not directly with Krishna, when he's off in the pasturing grounds or something, what do Mother Yashoda and the other elderly gopis do? Or what do the young gopis and Radharani do? They're hearing, chanting, and remembering about Krishna, right? They're singing songs about Krishna, they're remembering his pastimes, they're hearing, it's the same activity. We have been so blessed that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given us in Kali Yuga such a wonderful process. We're probably the least advanced devotees, at least for several millions and billions of years, because it's Kali Yuga, and we're given the greatest process, because this is the process of pure devotional service. We are performing pure devotional service. We may not be, quote unquote, pure devotees, in that we still have a long way to go to clear, to purify our hearts and come to that highest stage. But the practice that we're doing is the practice of pure devotional service. So it's a very wonderful thing. Prabhupada says, because of our ignorance of the spiritual body, of which we have no experience, we do not know the activities of the spiritual body. If by Krishna's grace we act in our spiritual body, we can transcend both the gross and subtle bodies. In other words, we gradually train ourselves to act in terms of the spiritual body. It's stated in Narada Pancharatra, Hrishikena Hrishikesha Sevana Bhakti Ruchite. Devotional service means engaging the spiritual body and spiritual senses in the service of the Lord. When engaged in such activities, the action, reaction, the gross and subtle bodies cease. So, we may think that it's just our material body, our gross body, doing different activities in service, but no. The spiritual body is also acting and becoming activated. Right? We're actually reviving that spiritual body that is within us, and it becomes stronger, more prominent, it comes more to the surface. In the beginning, the spiritual body is pretty buried under all of our material coverings, right? But as we progress in Krishna consciousness, as we hear, chant, and perform activities of Krishna consciousness, of sadhana bhakti, more and more it comes to the forefront. So eventually we are uncovering that. Prabhupada sometimes said it like that. It's an uncovering process. It's like an archaeological dig, to find that spiritual body within ourselves and bring it out. He didn't say that, but anyway, it's the idea. So, Bhagavad Gita gives us so many instructions how to do this. Satatam kirtayantotam yatatascha dhridavrata namasyantas jamam bhaktya nitya yuktupasate. Always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me, these great souls perpetually worship me with devotion. So just this verse tells us three things. The process of devotional service, satatam kirtayantotam, of hearing and chanting, engaging in service, dhridavrata, with determination. That means like with a great vow. No, it's being very determined. I'm going to be determined to do devotional service. I'm not going to be led astray. I'm not going to wander off somewhere else. And with a certain mood. Not a mechanical mood. Bhaktya nitya yuktupasate, a mood of devotion. Okay? So that mood of devotion is very important. In other words, even if we don't always feel very devoted, in some ways it's probably saying more or less, you act as though you were. You act as, in other words, if you act as an advanced devotee will act, you will eventually become an advanced devotee. Right? Now, it's not a mechanical thing, but it's all by the mercy of Krishna and Guru. And when we act in ways that are pleasing to the Guru and pleasing to Krishna, then Krishna gives us advancement in Krishna consciousness. Krishna helps bring us to Him, as he says at the end of the 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. In other words, so much is dependent upon desire. The living entity has the quality, the jiva, to desire. And we want to focus those desires. We want to focus those desires in such a way that we want Krishna. We are striving to achieve Krishna. And if that desire is strong, Krishna fulfills it. It's really fairly simple. There's one nice verse, I think it's 11th canto, chapter 20, verse 27, somewhere in there, where it's talking about that the devotee may even not maybe having so many difficulties and so many struggles, and Krishna's encouraged them just to continue onward, and you will achieve success. And I think the thing is, that verse, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in his commentary, says, a sincere devotee is one who desires Krishna more than they desire Maya. In other words, it's not that there aren't material desires in us still. There may be so many material desires, but basically, at heart, what do we want? I would say you would not be in this room if you didn't desire Krishna more than Maya, because there's a lot of other things you can do on a Sunday afternoon than sit in a Srimad Bhagavatam class or a Bhagavad Gita class, right? No, I mean, that's obviously just one example. But it's your life, your whole lives you're doing this. You're dedicating your lives to serving Krishna. Again, so many other things you can do in the material world. There's things that pay a lot better than devotional service, I'm sure. And, things that might be more materially enjoyable. But you've all made the decision. You might think, well, I have so many material desires. Okay, we have so many material desires, but you fundamentally, the Atma has the desire for Krishna, to go back to Krishna, to achieve relationship with Krishna, to love Krishna, and enjoy that loving relationship with Krishna. And as long as that's there, Krishna will pull us forward. And of course, one of the main ways he pulls us forward is through the spiritual master. The spiritual master comes, gives us spiritual knowledge, gives us instruction, and gives us his mercy as the intercessory to bring us to Krishna. So the devotees derive great pleasure from devotional service. I'm way over time, sorry. I'll end with Prabhupada's purport to Bhagavad Gita 1854. The devotee in Krishna consciousness has nothing for which to lament or desire. Since God is full, a living entity who is engaged in God's service in Krishna consciousness becomes also full in himself. He is just like a river cleansed of all dirty water. Because a pure devotee has no thought other than Krishna, he is naturally always joyful. He does not lament for any material loss or aspire for gain, because he's full in the service of the Lord. He has no desire for material enjoyment, because he knows that every living entity is a fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and eternally a servant. Okay? So thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Bhagavad Gita. Jai. Namo Vishwaya. We're a little bit over. If anyone needs to leave, I won't be offended if you have to go. Or go get prasadam. That sounds like a good idea. Any quick questions? Yes, Prabhu.
Hello. First thing, just a comment or two. Thank you very much for it was very nice, very, very nice to emphasis of Krishna and love and rasa and so forth and so on. First, is there usually in Facebook somebody